would encourage you to reflect and say, how have I taken risk in my life? And if you haven't taken risk, if you're living in the same city that you grew up in the same friend group, eating the same thing, same routine, blah, 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 you haven't grown, I think that person's going to have a really hard time with their confidence in starting a business, to be honest. You have to show yourself that you can figure out things in new environments and uncomfortable situations. That is a really great tool that prepares you for the confidence you need to go all in on yourself.
Yeah, hey, the market hustle, helping you to succeed, teaching like nobody else. Financial empowerment, giving you strategies for generational wealth, so you can start helping yourself. More money for you to be getting. This the moment for you to be winning and be living financially independent.
Welcome to episode 47 of the Market Hustle podcast. For those of you who are new here, my name is Josh. I am the guy behind the Market Hustle. And for those of you who are returning, welcome back to another great episode. Today, we've got the honor of welcoming Anne, an entrepreneur who built and sold SolidCore Fitness, growing it from a single studio, opened with just $175,000 of her savings, to growing it to over 110 locations nationwide. After selling the company in 2023, Anne's net worth jumped to over $100 million. So quite the investment return right there. She's also launched a nonprofit back in her early days called Back on My Feet, designed to help those who are experiencing homelessness. Anne's journey highlights many of the principles we talk about on this podcast often. So I am beyond excited to have her here just so we can all learn, dive into her success, dive into some of her key lessons that she's learned from both her business experience and just her personal growth journey in general. So before we officially dive into welcoming Anne on the podcast, I want to hop over to Pierce. We got our co-host Pierce here today with me. Pierce, how are things going in Southern California, my friends?
They're warm, dude. It's 77 degrees outside on April 8th, so I can't complain too much. Other than that, just dealing with the house remodel, so the annoyances of having furniture in places it's not supposed to be. Other than that, I'm excited to ask Anne some questions and learn more about her and see how the podcast can relate to her.
Awesome stuff. Well, I completely agree. This is going to be fun. So let's not waste any more time. Great to have you back on the podcast, Pierce. Anne, welcome to the Market Hustle podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you very much, Josh and Pierce. Nice to see you guys in person. And like I said, put a face behind all the great content you guys put out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Remind us where you're at. Where are you located? I'm
in Miami. So yeah, perfect weather, just like Pierce right now.
Yeah, enjoy it. I'm in Seattle, so it's been a little bit cloudy and rainy as usual. So a little jealous, but enjoy the sun while you can.
Yeah, well, it's there's an abundance of that down here in Miami. So whenever you need it, it's there for you.
I'll keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and just jump right into things. So I'm kind of curious, like maybe about your early days, right before you started SolidCore. Where were you at in your life at that time, and like what decisions led, or what were the key decisions you made to jumping into building your fitness empire? Like I'm just kind of curious, like those early days, right before you officially made the jump into everything.
Yeah, well, you mentioned in your intro, so before SolidCore, I had been running a nonprofit that I had founded and scaled across the country called Back on My Feet. And that is a nonprofit that uses running to help the homeless change the way that they see themselves so that we can change the direction of their life. We have to first focus on self-worth, self-value, self-discipline, and all of that great stuff to know that they are capable of more than maybe they thought that they were. So I did that for 6.5 years, had an amazing time building, again, that nonprofit around the country. And at some point, I wasn't expecting this at all, Josh, but it was like, okay, it's time to go do something else. And, for a lot of entrepreneurs out there, when we start our first thing, we kind of think like it'll be it forever. Because one, if it's working, two, you're so excited about it and you have so much passion. So that was something that I, again, wasn't expecting, but had realized that Back on My Feet was a chapter in my book and wasn't going to be my whole story. And so I started to open myself up to what was next. And I walked by a Pilates studio in California and I thought it was cute. I thought it was very LA. And that's what people in LA do to work out. Lo and behold, it was very hard and very challenging. And I just was like, oh my God, if I didn't know that you could work out this way, that means other people out there don't know you can work out this way. And what I'm really good at is branding, community, and scaling. And so this just felt like the perfect thing for my next entrepreneurial go at it. And so I had saved 175K over the last 6 years. Now, mind you, I had zero money before I started back on my feet, probably a negative net worth, to be honest. So I got really diligent about putting money away, just knowing like, who knows what the future holds. And I wanted to be prepared enough to have enough to back myself or something. And so it really took pretty much that entire 175K to get the first SolidCore studio open in DC.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And I can only imagine just the, I don't want to say hesitation, but just like the intensity of that moment. You know, when you've built up a large savings, you know, it took you over 6 years to build up $175,000 in savings, which is no small feature. You know, that takes time, that takes effort, and to pivot towards going all in on your dreams and seeing an opportunity and striking into that, like that's powerful. And I'm kind of curious, like, did you have like, I'm sure you had people telling you like that was a terrible idea, don't do it. Like, how did you maneuver through those early days? How did you rise above maybe the self-doubt and some of the criticism that maybe you heard of like, oh, you know, fitness studios, that's a crowded space. You know, everybody has a fitness studio. Like how did you maneuver through all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember specifically a phone call from my accountant, you know, because he's very risk averse. And he was like, Ann, gyms have like the highest failure rate out of any business. And I'm just like, you don't get it, you don't see it. And fortunately, Josh, I had, you know, this whole nonprofit behind me that I went all in on, you know, when people were calling me nuts and crazy and like, what do you mean you're going to do this for work? Like, you're going to just run with the homeless for work? And I'm like, I'm going to build a fully fledged nonprofit, add programming, raise money, have staff, you know. And a big drive for me always in my life was like, I never wanted my life to be normal and boring. And I grew up in North Dakota. And so I appreciate my roots and where I'm from, but I remember looking around a lot and just seeing, man, everybody seems to be a little bit miserable and life seems to be hard and people seem to be doing this thing that they don't really want to be doing. And it's very monotonous. And like, why are people living that way? So there was a real curiosity about life in general of like, there has to be a different way to do this. And that was, I just didn't want to be bored. I didn't want to be like everybody else. And so when you, and any entrepreneur out there feels a little bit of that way, I think. So when it was a decision to pivot to SolidCore, I just knew like, I can't work for anybody else. Like I think I would get fired. Like I just didn't feel that was even possible for me. So when I pick SolidCore, you know, as an entrepreneur, we can't just pick anything. We have to figure out what are our talents and skill sets and how do we match that up with a business so that we're going to play a game that we can win. And to really build a successful fitness, you know, company, I felt, listen, the workout has to be incredible, which I felt very confident in. The community has to be authentic and consistent, which I knew how to execute. And I had to be able to open many of these things, which I felt like I had the skill sets to be able to do. So all of those elements lined up. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't their fair share of doubts that showed up, right? Because we all get them. I don't care if you've started 10 companies, like they still pop up every now and then, and you have to have a practice and you have to like stop and analyze where they're coming from. So I got this offer, you know, before I opened my first studio from a board member at my old nonprofit that I had ran. And he was like, Ann, I'll give you 75K for 30% stake in SolidCore. Cause I was telling him, oh, I don't want to put all my money in this. Like, am I crazy? What do you think? And that's the offer he made me. And I'm like, wow, okay, maybe this would be really smart of me to do this. I wouldn't have to use all of my money. I'll use his money. And the moment that came out of my mouth, it was like, if I take this guy's money, when I have enough money to do it on my own, all I'm telling myself is I really don't believe enough in my capabilities to do this. And if I don't believe in myself, then I shouldn't do this at all. And really, that's not what I believe. I'm just scared. And like, it's normal to feel scared, but like, the answer is no. And obviously, thank God that I didn't do that. That would have been a massive, you know, financial error for me in the very beginning. So I have learned that, you know, if you put a quarter in the doubt jar when you're doing anything, when things get hard, you start to lean in to hedging your bets. You start to be like, oh, like even with the market, Josh, when you hear people be like, oh, well, I sold all my stuff, in December, I didn't have to experience this. We make the narrative, make sense for the action that we took.
Mhm.
And I just knew if I took that guy's money when things got hard, I would be like, okay, maybe I wasn't really the right person to do this. Like, oh, at least I didn't use all my money. So I think going all in on whatever you are passionate about is actually a really great strategy.
That makes sense. Yeah, because think about it. When you put, I mean, clearly, when all of your money's in on that project, you're going to give it your 100%
Yeah.
effort. Like you're not going to be half into it compared to like if you had that exit door with the invest. Like if you had somebody invest with you and they kind of offset some of your investment, you kind of have an exit door. It's easier to kind of not be fully into it when it's all yours. Like so like you made it all yours. You used your money to build something incredible. And it sounds like, you can credit a lot of your success to fully being into it, with yourself, like not taking on investors, not taking on outside money, and you taking 100% responsibility for this project that you built out, or this fitness empire that you built out, which is incredible. I'm curious though, maybe more so for somebody who's like considering, maybe starting their own business, and maybe they're thinking of a couple different routes, like they know their skills a little bit, but they're still kind of hesitant, like maybe they have the money, the capital. What would you tell them to kind of maybe some like practical
Mm-hmm.
questions to consider to help them get over that hurdle and take the bets or take the risk on themselves? Like, is there something that helped
Mm-hmm.
you in those early days, like any perspective shifting thoughts or moments that kind of helped you get over those hurdles of hesitation that you could share with us?
Yeah, listen, I think people can do this in their everyday life. So I actually think back to the moment when I decided to go all in on back on my feet. I had literally a job at Comcast, a six-figure job that I was supposed to go in the next day. And I had been building this running club, for 5 weeks. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to take that job. I think I'm going to call them and tell them, that I'm going to do back on my feet instead. And everybody was like, you're going to walk away from it. I mean, this was almost 20 years ago now, a six-figure job with stock options, XYZ. And in that moment, I remember thinking, gosh, like actually, even though I've never started my own nonprofit or my own business, I have numerous examples of my life where I actually have bet on myself and it worked out. Moving away from home to go to college, graduating in 3 years ahead of other people, and taking 21 credits and being like, I'm going to figure out a way to manage my time. Then I went to DC and moved in with three people I had never met before in a city that I've never been before, for an internship, and then went back to a brand new neighborhood. So it's like you start to stack these things in your personal life or your life decisions where you're like, I've actually taken a lot of risk and it's worked out just fine. And so I think people discredit themselves when the time comes to start a business. I would encourage you to reflect and say, how have I taken risk in my life? And if you haven't taken risk, if you're living in the same city that you grew up in the same friend group, eating the same thing, same routine, blah, 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 you haven't grown, I think that person's going to have a really hard time with their confidence in starting a business, to be honest. You have to show yourself that you can figure out things in new environments and uncomfortable situations. That is a really great tool that prepares you for the confidence you need to go all in on yourself. So I would start to take stock in your own life of how many changes that you have made voluntarily.
I like that. I like that. And it kind of, circles back to just getting comfortable with those, just changes in life in general, which is really where the magic happens. I mean, you're
Yeah.
a great example of, pivoting and, being able to rise to new heights, which is pretty awesome. I mean, the fact that you started your nonprofit, which was clearly successful, and then after that started something even massively more successful with the whole fitness studio, which is incredible. I guess that also kind of leads me to my next question, Anne, more along the lines of, how you're thinking about things now. I saw that, you recently sold your company, and I'm curious, like, actually, let's start here. Let's backtrack a little bit more. How has like your relationship with money kind of changed, like from those early stages, when you that right before you started your fitness journey or your fitness business, you had the $175,000 in savings, which takes a lot of resilience and grit to build up to in those early stages. I would argue like though, saving up, we say this all the time, like saving your first $100,000 or even just getting $100,000 in assets, that first milestone's it takes forever and it feels like slow and dry and you're learning, you're just learning the basics of finance and money management in the beginning. And a lot of it can be intimidating. And like once you get to like once you're able to maybe save up your first 100,000 or even 150,000, you start to build more self-confidence. You're like, oh wait, maybe I can be good with money. And clearly, and you took that to a completely different level after you hit those early milestones. But I'm curious, like maybe how your relationship has kind of changed with money, if there was any like difficulties you had, like just experiencing new levels of financial growth, or if you're still kind of rooted in maybe some of the same principles that you started with.
Yeah. So I can tell you all of our money originations happen from our family households, right? So we didn't have a lot of money growing up. And my dad actually is a gambling addict. So which surfaced when I was a teenager, and my dad gambled away pretty much all of our college, educations and savings that, my mom had worked really hard for. She was a public school teacher. My dad sold insurance, but he just didn't bring in a lot of income. And I saw money, at least my interpretation of what happened is, money ripped apart my family. And I vowed to myself when I was young that like, one, I'm going to be somebody someday. And I'm going to make a lot of money. I didn't know what that meant, but I figured I'm at least going to tell myself these things. And so after, through back on my feet and starting the own thing and whatever, I wouldn't say I was like great with money. I mean, I had no money by the time I was 26 years old. I don't remember being really stressed out about money at that time. I just was sort of like, yeah, my relationship when I was in my 20s is obviously very different than, it's very different from what it is today. And there is this more state of abundance, but there's also this state of grounding that is there. So every round of money that I raise, I'm trying to figure out a great example to give your listeners here, but every round of money that I raised at SolidCore, I took money off the table. And so I got my first like real check when I was 35 years old. And it was for $6 million, right? I sold some equity in SolidCore. We put some money into the business. And there wasn't a ton that changed for me at that point. It was just like, great, here's some financial security. It was cool to get the wire. And I put that money pretty much, in the market and in an ETF. And kind of just like let it sit there for a while. And then a couple of years later, I did it again and took another, call it $11 million off the table. Same thing. The money is sort of sitting and growing. There's not too much about my lifestyle, or my relationship with money that changed because I was so focused on growing the business. But once I sold SolidCore and got another large check where my net worth, surpassed $100 million at the end of that, that's when things, and I sold the business. So I was like, okay, great. I'm not working on that anymore. It was definitely a little bit of an emotional roller coaster because I realized I had to raise my levels on everything, right? My spending levels, because what's the point of having it if you're never going to spend it? My giving levels, my what's expensive level, and my investing level. Because if you don't graduate with the more money that you have, I think you end up living small. And I know you hear these stories about people who, have 500 million or a billionaire and they like still live in the same house and they never spend their money and they spend $5,000 a month. And I'm just sort of like, why not put that money to better use some way, somehow? So I actually had to test it, right? Like I went out and I'm not a big handbag person at all, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go buy a handbag for $10,000 and just see what it's like and how it feels. It doesn't do anything for me. I'm not a jewelry person. I'm not a handbag person, pretty much not really a material person at all. I bought a Bentley. I love that Bentley. I know nothing about it besides the fact that it's pretty. And that was a great use of money that I wanted to celebrate on. But really, like Josh, besides that, my relationship with money has just elevated that I give more, I spend more, and I invest more. But who I am and the things I like to do hasn't changed at all.
I love that. Go ahead, Pierce. I think you have a question.
Yeah. So After hearing you for the last couple of minutes now, it's your story is just it's so interesting. And from starting a nonprofit to a for-profit, like how did you see your impact differences in the world? You're doing something for someone else, you're giving to the world, and then you're doing something finally from yourself after you were with, back on your feet for what, 6 years? So I
Mhm.
wonder, like, how was the impact going from both those, like those transitioning from both those? Like, what was the impact like? Did you notice any difference?
Yeah, I felt the exact same, right? Because I am the kind of entrepreneur that has to build something that is so authentic to who I am that makes people's lives happier and healthier. I love empowering and I like unlocking potential. So when you think about it, right, Back on My Feet was doing that for many people living in homeless shelters, right? We were showing them they were capable of a lot more, and we were doing it in a community that had a positive feedback loop of celebrating them, appreciating them, caring for them. SolidCore, even though the entity was different, right? It was a for-profit company. I really felt that I was introducing people to a community and a workout that was going to change their own relationship with their body and their strength and be a part of a really fun community where people were like rooting each other on and challenging each other and wanted to see each other get stronger. So, I think the more niche you can be about what you're really good at, the more you can zone in and win in that category. So I like to describe myself that like I'm an entrepreneur who knows how to build quality in-person branded experiences. And I know how to do that better than anybody else. And I know how to scale it. And so I would never be an entrepreneur that would like make chairs. There would be like nothing to me that would be like that. I don't care if I would be able to make $50 million. I'd be like, I just can't wake up every day and do that. Nothing about that I have passion for. So I really didn't really feel too much difference, Pierce. I just felt like I was making people's lives better.
And so that kind of leads me to my next question, because it seemed like you kind of had a set path of what you knew you were good at. What led you to figure out? Because I mean, I'm 22, I'm
Mhm.
still finding myself in this world, and I'm
Yeah.
finding what I'm good at. What did you do to figure out what you were good at? And I mean, it
Yeah.
might be, a personal question, but I'm curious.
No,
I
I think it's a
all this
great
one.
question. I
So
mean, I have friends in their 40s who are like, I don't have
yeah,
passion. Like, I don't have
exactly.
this thing. Yeah. So I think it's really paying attention to, again, both your hobbies and your passions, right? So both you can see SolidCore and Back on My Feet. They're both built on fitness. I love fitness. I love working out. I love moving my body. And back on my feet days, I was a runner. So everything was just specific to who I was and figured out how to build business around that. And some of this is trial and error in work. Like I remember almost getting fired from two jobs. Like I am not a very detail oriented person. I tend to see things that most people won't see, and I have a high risk tolerance, right? So it makes me a really great visionary. And you can take some of these tests, right? You can take the Enneagram, you can take it's called the DISC profile to sort of understand your own personality traits a little bit more. These things are highly, highly accurate. I mean, I just did one a few weeks ago and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly, who I am. So you can figure out where your skill sets lie and what environment you might be best in. Because I knew that I move quickly, I know how to execute, and I have a knack for knowing what systems and processes need to be in place. But Pierce, in the same breath, like I'm not the one to put them in place, if that makes sense. Like someone else has to do that. If you asked me to make a PowerPoint right now, like we would be here until Saturday of trying to put all of that stuff together. So some of it is paying attention in your work environment, how your brain works, and you can take again a bunch of tests. And I think honestly, asking feedback sometimes from our friends and our family, and like, what do you think I'm good at? And trying to see some of the similarities that are there between some of the answers that you get. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, you're really good at like welding, like a specific skill set. But if it's, wow, you're really good at making decisions, you give really good advice, like you've got great critical thinking skills, those sorts of things can help you figure out, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, or maybe you're actually a really great number two, number three person, because you have a highly operational brain and you know how to execute somebody who gives you a vision, to execute. So that's kind of where I would start in the recommendations I would give.
Sorry, Josh. I'm gonna take one more question.
Go for it.
But so you've grown your business to, the next level of most people can't even comprehend. And so, I mean, I know some people who are super deep into business, and I kind of know how it screws with them. It screws with their brain and how they work. And I'm just curious, have you ever lost yourself while trying to build this, like, along the way? Because I know many people who have, and for me, I think it's kind of a normal thing for people to do, to kind of just get lost in it for a second, and what did it take for you to kind of find who you were during that process?
Yeah, so great question. And, as I was kind of reflecting on this today, and people ask like, oh, and you must have sacrificed so much. And I'm like, I don't feel like I sacrificed really anything. I felt I was operating in such alignment with who I was. But I'll tell you what, Pierce, like now sitting here after building two things, right, back to back, after having the big exit and having, more money than I know what to do with, like, there is a part of me where you'd be like, so go ask somebody who knows me, like, describe Anne. They'd be like, she's highly driven, she's very ambitious, she's really competitive and she likes to win. And I'm like, yeah, like there's that girl that I'm like, yeah, I'm that girl, but I also feel like I am much more in my feminine. I have no desire to start another business right now, who knows, in 10 years or so. I apply those things to beach volleyball, so I still get that out of me. But like, I don't feel as ambitious and as driven right now. So to answer your question of like losing ourselves, I think different seasons in our lives bring out these different versions of us. And that's actually a really important part of me measuring my life when I get to the end. Did I step into these different versions of who I am, or did I stay in the same lane for 40 years because I didn't know who else I could be? So when we strip away an environment or an attachment, whether it be sometimes a person, a job, a city, something, we end up kind of spending our time in different ways, or our emotions evolve, our values evolve. And it's a big reason why I sold SolidCore. Like, people ask that all the time of like, oh my God, SolidCore was doing so great, why did you sell? I'm like, because 100 studios was always my goal. And my number was always $100 million, right? And if I stayed, I would have been staying for the sake of more. And that is not how I live my life. I want to have numerous chapters, experiences, different versions of myself that I get to experience, rather than just the same person over and over again.
Well, I mean, that's honorable. I mean, I really respect that. Josh, I'll let you hit your next question, but thank you for answering that. That's educational.
No,
Yeah.
and it's really awesome to hear just the way you have kind of designed, your life and just the path that you're currently on, or the way you kind of think of evolving as a person, especially when it comes to business. Because to Pierce's point, especially if you start a business and maybe it becomes your baby, like it's easy to get overly attached with it to where you think people kind of wrap their whole entire identity around it, right? And it seems like you did a good job at being able to, realize who you are as a person and kind of detach yourself from that success and be okay with kind of letting go and moving on to like the next part of your life in general, which is incredible, really. I'm also curious, Anne, more along the lines of, I think it'll be helpful for our audience to just think, more along the lines of like diversification. So like you're clearly a high net worth individual. So I'm super curious to get your thoughts on how you think through diversification, especially when it comes to different investments. Like, of course, you might be playing a different game from somebody who's just getting started, but I'm just really curious to get your thoughts on how you think of diversification.
Yeah, totally. And you know this, right? There's wealth creation and there's wealth preservation. And
Mhm.
I am much more in wealth preservation mode now. So I would never take all of my money and put it in one stock, right? For one, I don't control that stock. I'm much more comfortable betting on myself and backing myself, and putting all my money behind me. But I would never do that at this point. That would be sort of silly. So I am highly diversified. 99% of my money is invested in something, right? So whether that is, the majority is in public equities, unfortunately or fortunately right now, depending on how you look at it. If you're banking on an impressive rebound here, but it's been a little tough to swallow these days.
Mhm.
And I have real estate, I have hedge funds, I have private equity, I have, less than frankly 2% in crypto. I have some art. And then I do some investments, in startups. And the only in startups I'll invest in is if I'm totally in love with the founder and think the founder is just so much fun to work with, and has that special sauce. And I really appreciate, the business that they're doing of trying to make people's lives happier and healthier. Like anything else, I don't even care if it's a great opportunity. It's just not something that like I'd rather just keep my money in the market or private equity, and the private equity fund can invest in businesses like that. So that's where I sort of see things right now. And I do kind of sometimes struggle, Josh, because have you guys read the book Die with Zero? You must have heard about this book with Bill
Yes.
Perkins. So I have that mentality, and I am really mindful of not chasing money for the sake of more. But as a competitive person and somebody who likes to win and view herself as smart, you also like to see your money grow, because it's a game at this point where you're like, how smart am I? How can I sort of maneuver this thing that my net worth can continue to grow while also not getting obsessed over that, and doing the experiences, spending the money. Because if you let $100 million just sit there and be invested and you're not really spending it, that money is going to grow pretty quickly over the next 30 years, to massive numbers that you're never gonna spend, especially if you weren't spending along the way. So yeah, I'm definitely diversified now, but I am trying to not get so caught up in the more and more and more game for the sake of having more.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's awesome. I love how thoughtful you are on it as well. Like you've clearly thought all of this out, and you understand what you want out of investing, or just like your goals in general, which is great. I'm also curious, like if we can dive in a little bit more along the lines of maybe around the next chapter, like kind of where you're kind of starting to potentially see a path opening up, or are you just kind of in a wait and see, like just trying different things out right now? Is there any, I know you mentioned that you don't see yourself starting another business. Could you see yourself going more down the lines of investing in startup companies? I know you kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where I am right now. And I do a lot of public speaking. I sort of feel like I'm in this empowerment season of my life. Is I want to, it's things like this, right? I'm really grateful that, you guys put on this podcast, and people put on podcasts, that I get to go on and hopefully share some wisdom and help people along the way get to where if people want to be where I am, how can I help you do that? So there's a massive amount of my time that is through empowerment, speaking, podcasts, and, mass mentoring is what I call it when I sort of host things for free online. So it's like this educational side based around money. I get really passionate about money, and I get passionate about people, living a life where they can be proud at the end of their time. And I think a lot of that is through entrepreneurship, right? We want to see what we're made of. And I'm a big believer in that. So that piece, and then again from the investment side. So I'm, wrapping up a deal right now with a good friend actually, who's got 7 gyms in New York, and I think what he's doing is very different in the space. And again, he's a founder that has something to prove, and I will sit on his board and probably spend, a good 5 to 7 hours a week, helping him succeed. Because I like him a lot, and I like, what his business a lot. But like I said, it takes a lot. It takes a lot for me to want to give that level of commitment, because I'll tell you again, go back to Die with Zero. I am young and healthy, and I love to move my body. So beach volleyball gets priority for 2 to 3 hours every single day. And like, I'm not willing to make a lot of concessions there. And there's also, 90 minutes spent at the gym, 5 days a week, and going on walks with my dog. And, those are things that I want to maximize as much as I possibly can. We did the 29029 event last year, and I just want to physically challenge my body. I sort of think it's sometimes backwards, and you guys can tell me if you agree, but like starting a business when you're 60, 65, when you maybe are less active and not doing as much, seems like something that I can see myself doing when you just want to be maybe home a little bit more and sitting a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm really happy with like this fun balance right now on physical activity.
That's awesome. No, and I'm glad you're able to, it's cool to see like just the different phases of your life that you've been through, and that you're intentionally kind of, in a way, kind of making them, like you're leaving room to still be active and enjoy your life, rather than getting trapped in the, maybe just working just for work's sake, which is really good. I think it's something I see, especially if like in the corporate world, where it's just easy just to kind of become, you chase works for work's sake in that sense. No matter even if you've made all the money that you want, like there's a lot of people in the corporate America who they might be millionaires as well, just from their corporate job, but they're still stuck in that
Yeah, well, that goes back to the growth thing, Josh, where I think if you ask people, do you want to grow? Is growth important to you? Everybody says yes. But then you try to get them to really articulate, well, what kind of growth have you had in your life in the last 10 years? There was this podcast, and I wish I could remember this guy's name in the podcast, but he had sold his tech company, call it for like 20, $25 million. And he's like, the thing that I should have done for my career is move to Silicon Valley and got immersed, in that community because I just sold and built this product and blah, blah, blah. But I was going to have a repeat of my life, maybe a different company, but pretty much doing the same thing I was doing, in tech. And if I really value growth and experiences, I need to think about maybe, and this is what he did. He got rid of his US citizenship and moved to a different country and like learned the language, and figured out a different way to, if he wanted to make money or to live. And I'm like, wow, that guy's on a different level than even I am. But I think many of us live our life some version of the same movie because we're like, well, this is what I'm good at, so this is where I'm going to stay and play. And I really do think that like that's where regret can come from, of like I never tried anything else. And that's where I think people get a little bit bored, and that's where we end up not challenging our skill sets, and how we can spend our time differently if we didn't have this one thing going on. So I just sort of know myself well enough to know that I'm like, and frankly, guys, I started another fitness company after SolidCore and I shut it down within 6 months because I'm like, what the F am I doing? I'm going to live the same 8 to 10 years. And like, can this thing work? Like, can I, sure. But like, it's going to be the same problems all over again. And I'm going to have the same experiences and the same thing just to do what? Build another fitness company. So I had a little bit of an existential crisis when that happened.
So I have a quick question. You are like the, I guess, pinnacle of like success in like most people's eyes. But what is success in your eyes? If you've reached the dollar amount, cool.
Mm-hmm.
You're good for the rest of your life unless you go, do
Yeah.
silly things. But what is success from now on?
I think that gets redefined, depending on the season you're in. So now, I just got married last year. And we are doing some of the family planning. Thank you. We're doing some of the family planning stuff right now. So it's changing, a little bit of my focus, not so much based off of my professional success. It might sound silly to some folks, but am I getting better at beach volleyball? Am I getting stronger, in the gym? Like those things are important on a year-over-year basis for me to measure, to show that I'm still working hard in those certain areas, and as we get into this, baby era of our life, it's like now I'm going to focus on also being a good mom and a good wife and a good friend. And I want to feel proud about how I spent my day and my time and how I treated people at the end of every day. And it has been a transition, Pierce, because for so long, again, when you are just like, oh my God, we opened, 30 studios in 2019. I am used to like the professional achievements defining who I am and defining my self-worth and defining society's approval, of me in so many ways. But it has to be this conscious decision if I want to have this other part of my life where I'm finally making relationships, sort of my priority over business stuff. Like I want that. It's going to feel different, but I measure my success a little bit differently than I did before. And, like I said, I would never sit here and be like, I would never start a business again. But I know for the next 12 to 15 months, that's not something I'm interested in doing. But who knows about 5 to 7 years down the road. But it would have to be very, very compelling, because when you don't have to do it for money, and anybody that I think tells you that, money isn't a motivator, I mean, I have felt a level of demotivation simply because, like, well, if we don't need the money, why would we do that? Why do the extra paperwork? Why do the administrative thing? Like, it does impact you in some way. So how you get even pickier about how you spend your time.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean, just kind of puts you in the perspective. Like, I mean, obviously, we all know money isn't everything, but I mean, once you get to like a dollar amount, just you really start focusing on like I'm not gonna say the more important things in life, but like the more important things in life.
Well, yeah. And if you think about asking people like, well, what's your number? And you really start to dig deeper. Some people just say $20 million. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean for your lifestyle? Like, do you know what that would mean? What you would be spending, on a month, and we just focus on getting to the mountain. And like, my number was 100 million for no other reason than the fact that like it was a 9-figure number, and not an 8-figure number.
Yeah.
And like I was so fixated on getting it, and that's what, happened and got done. But my life would be no difference if it was 100 million or 70 million or 50 million. Like there's no difference. And I'm not telling people not to be ambitious around money, but when you can really break down like, okay, what's the ideal lifestyle that you want for yourself? And after you buy the house, we definitely bought the big house, and we got our spending kind of like, okay, we spend about 100 and I guess now it's like 150 grand a month. Like every single month, that's what we spend. It's been pretty consistent. We don't want or need anything else beyond that. Some people might be like, holy crap, that's a lot. Well, that's like where we've landed with what's comfortable and works for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. New reality. Enjoy it. You earned it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's awesome, man. And I really appreciate you being transparent and being willing to share all of this with, our community, because it's always interesting just to hear first off the different levels. Like there's clearly levels to the money game, but also how at the end of the day, we say it on the Market Hustle page all the time. Like the whole reason why, at least we believe to get your money in order and get your finances situated is so you have control to do what you want in your life. Like you have the power to kind of craft the path you want to go on. And clearly, like you're a manifestation of that. Like you have the power to build the life that you want. And, answering those questions, I can imagine it's different for every person, right? Like what they wanted of life is different for different phases, right? Like in one part of your life, you might want to just kind of exist a little bit more, right? Like just breathe in life, and then less on the milestone phase of your life and more in just the, let's take a look around, let's see what's going on, and we can find the next path after that. I think it's something a lot of people struggle with when it comes to getting on that treadmill of going after, the big money milestones. And it's refreshing to hear somebody who's willing to be transparent about it all, because I feel like a lot of people aren't. Like they might, they might get wrapped up on that treadmill and they're not talking about some of the difficulty parts of what that kind of leads to problem-wise. And it's really admirable for you to come on here and share that and be willing to, just be open about it all.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And I didn't have any time between Back on My Feet and SolidCore for multiple of reasons, but I think there's a level of confidence that you reach when you're, aging. And I don't have anything to prove to anybody else anymore. Like I didn't feel that way after Back on My Feet. I felt like I don't want people to think I'm a one-hit wonder or like I got lucky or whatever. Like I know I can be an incredible entrepreneur, and I'm going to show myself and anybody else who's going to watch me, along the way. And obviously was manifesting what my next thing was. And SolidCore, like that Pilates thing, I'm like, oh my God, this is the thing. And I think if we don't have periods in our life like this, where it's like, you need a little bit of space to sort out how you feel. And, Pierce, you mentioned this earlier, but I didn't really have time to think of that building SolidCore. It was like, I didn't have to think about what my mission was because I was living it and doing it. And I had this thing that was far left the station. And again, I loved it. But when you have the flexibility now that, I have in my life to be like, how do I want to spend my day? You really start to learn a lot about who you are and what's important to you. And, there are days that are a little bit lazier than others. And I just kind of like, this is interesting. Why don't I really want to do anything? This isn't like me, or maybe it is like me now. But that downtime, and you don't get it when you're just going from one thing to another, or you don't get it when it's like a weekend. Like you don't get the brain space to sit and to think and to feel and to ponder and to pivot and all of that stuff. So, I mean, it's been really transformative for me, and I wouldn't trade it at all.
I love it. I love it. Well, and these podcasts go by pretty quickly. We're already almost an hour in, and I just want to make sure we maybe leave the audience with another actionable takeaway just from your vast experience and everything you've been through so far. Let's say like, what would you tell somebody more along the lines if they're struggling with the self-confidence, or maybe they're struggling with trying to just figure out what path to go on, like especially like maybe somebody like Pierce's age where they're still relatively young and they're still trying to figure out, what to do in life or even what route to go. Like what might you tell somebody like that who came up to you as like, Ann, help me out, help me figure out what to do. Maybe they don't have the confidence, maybe they don't have the ambition, and they feel lost. Like what would you maybe tell them?
Yeah, I think my husband always says this, but action is what builds confidence, and confidence is king, right? So you can't, it's really hard to do anything if you're not, it's hard to ask a girl out. It's hard to, ask for the raise or the promotion or put yourself out there, let alone, build a business. So working on confidence comes through action. There's actually a crazy stat out there that there's, people are so, afraid of rejection these days. There just isn't the resilience there. A lot of that may have to do with schools and how we're giving everybody, participation trophies and everybody wins and blah, 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 that we're just so afraid to lose. But you have to be willing to go to rejection therapy and like just get used to hearing no. It is what is actually going to build your confidence up and help you build your own trust mechanism in yourself, that you're like, oh, it's cool, that person like doesn't like my idea or doesn't like me or whatever, and that's totally okay. But you cannot, I don't think, have a high quality of life or be successful if you can't get over rejection. And the only way to get over rejection is to put yourself in situations where you're going to get rejected and just deal with the uncomfortableness, something, whether it's like, I cut my hair off when I was, I don't know, 15 years ago now. And it was like very scary. And I'm like, I'm doing it because it's scary. And that sounds like a small example, but it's still an uncertain thing that like, you have to get through. This is new. I'm not sure how this is going to go. So stacking, like I said earlier in the podcast, stacking those small examples that you can show yourself that you know how to figure things out that you didn't know before is the best confidence builder there is.
That's awesome. And it's kind of like the ironic paradox where it's like the best way to get better with it is, like you said, just put yourself in those situations and you kind of build up the skills through experience. And, just to tie it back to the stock market, it's similar to, investing, where you can read everything every book out there or every YouTube video out there on how to deal with stock market crashes. But one of the best ways to, just build up that experience is to kind of just put your feet in the water, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe $50 a week, like even if it's a small amount, like just get started. And that way you'll be able to feel out these ebbs and flows of these markets, like the uncertainty, which inevitably pops up from time to time, like it is now. It's one of the best ways to build that confidence or that investor mindset is just by, putting your feet in the water. So great stuff right there, Ann. And is there any last thoughts that you have on, everything we discussed today? I mean, again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to share some of your incredible insights and just your story in general, which is super admirable. But any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience before we officially wrap things up?
Yeah, I'm sure you guys speak about this a lot, but and it comes up a lot because it's true. It's just like watching your mindset. Watch how you speak to yourself as it relates to money. Like, oh, I don't know anything about money. Well, now you've created an identity for yourself that like you're not good with money and you don't know about money. So now you're going to look for evidence over and over again that you don't know about money, and that's somebody else's role or job and whatever. So again, you're speaking to somebody who didn't come from money, who had zero net worth at 26. I didn't know what the stock market was either. I didn't know what private equity was. I didn't know what a preferred return was. And like, you just have to be willing to learn and educate yourself. And what you say about yourself and your relationship with money is how you will show up with money. So be mindful of that.
Well said. Well said. Pierce, how about you, my friend? Any last thoughts before we officially wrap up this podcast or questions for Ann?
No, I just want to thank you for coming on. This has been super insightful for myself, and I don't mean to sound selfish about that, but I mean I've learned a lot, like about just everything that you've preached over the last 45 minutes to an hour, whatever it's been. But thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Of course. Well, and yeah, thank you again for joining us on the Market Hustle podcast. Your journey from investing your personal savings, 175,000, to building your business, your empire, and increasing your net worth to over 100 million is truly incredible. For everyone listening, make sure to go follow Ann on social media to keep up with her next chapter and maybe just some of the insights she's sharing along the way. We'll also include those links to her social media in the podcast bio. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to share it with a friend or two. And also take a minute to leave us a quick 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. It means a lot. That being said, we'll be back again next week with another great episode. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
If you feel just like I do, link up, come and join this crew. Hey, I'm a go investing, I'ma watch my money double, take it to another level. With that market hustle, ay, always play it smart. You ain't dealing with a sucker, take it to another level. With that market hustle, I'ma hustle, ay, hustle. With that market hustle, I'ma hustle, ay, hustle. With that market hustle, I'ma hustle, hustle. With that market hustle, I'ma hustle, hustle. With that market hustle, go.